The hall was buzzing with activity. It was a large, well-lit space decorated with flags and banners that reflected the importance of the event. People moved about, shaking hands, laughing, and speaking in low tones, as if everyone was trying to make a good impression. Cameras clicked in the background, capturing every smile and every handshake. In the center of all this, a young boy quietly stood beside a grown-up he had come with, observing everything with wide, curious eyes. The boy was dressed neatly in a small suit, his hair combed just right, and there was a calmness about him that contrasted sharply with the flurry of adults around him. He did not fidget or look around nervously. Instead, he scanned the room carefully, noticing details that most of the adults seemed to miss. The boy had been told this event was important, that many influential people were present, and that he should be on his best behavior. He had heard whispers that a former president would be there, and he could see the crowd's excitement building whenever someone mentioned the name. But he didn't feel nervous. He simply watched, analyzing the conversations and the people in the room. He noticed how some adults leaned in too close to each other when they spoke, how others tried to hide a smirk when someone made a boastful comment, and how some moved about as if they were weighing their words before they spoke. The boy's mind was sharp, absorbing everything like a sponge. As people mingled, he saw the former president arrive. There was an immediate shift in energy in the room. Cameras turned toward him and a wave of applause filled the space. Some of the adults straightened their posture. Others whispered to each other, and the boy could feel the weight of the moment. He watched closely, noting how even seasoned politicians seemed slightly uneasy in the presence of someone so powerful. But the boy was not intimidated. He had grown up around strong personalities and had learned early that size, fame, or titles didn't automatically make someone right or wise. He quietly studied the former president's gestures, his way of speaking, the confidence he carried, and even the subtle moments when he paused or smiled. While the adults were busy with handshakes and introductions, the boy's attention drifted to smaller, unnoticed things. He noticed a waiter almost dropping a tray, the way a few guests whispered to each other, and the nervous glance of someone standing alone near the edge of the room. Every detail seemed important to him, and he kept it all in his mind. He was already thinking about what he might say if the moment came, though he had not yet spoken to anyone in the room. A speech began, and the room quieted down. The speaker was a respected figure, someone used to commanding attention. The boy listened intently, nodding occasionally, but he was also noticing the inconsistencies in what was being said. There were phrases that seemed exaggerated, claims that didn't add up, and the adults around him either didn't notice or chose to ignore them. Some nodded politely, some laughed at jokes, and some whispered to each other, trying to appear engaged. But the boy's mind was racing. He understood the importance of truth and honesty, and he could feel a growing tension inside him. He wanted to speak, but he also knew the room was full of people who were used to controlling the conversation. Still, he remained calm, observing, waiting for the right moment. The former president listened as well, his eyes scanning the crowd and occasionally resting on the speaker. He seemed confident, almost unshakable, but the boy noticed tiny signs of surprise and curiosity in his expression. Even someone so powerful could be caught off guard. The boy felt a strange sense of connection, noticing that both he and the former president were carefully watching, analyzing the scene. It was as if the room had become a chessboard, and everyone was moving pieces. But the boy was the one quietly thinking 3 steps ahead. As the speech continued, the boy noticed a few people in the room who were clearly uncomfortable. Their smiles were forced, their laughter a little too loud, and their gestures stiff. He understood why. The speaker's words carried a weight, and those who did not fully agree were trying to hide it. The boy felt a mix of excitement and determination. He wanted to make a difference, to say something that mattered, but he also understood that he had to choose the right moment. Patience had always been one of his strengths, and he relied on it now. During a pause in the speech, the boy quietly whispered to the adult beside him, asking a simple, insightful question about the topic being discussed. The adult looked at him with a mix of surprise and pride, impressed that someone so young was thinking so deeply. The boy's question, though soft and polite, hinted at a level of understanding that was unusual for his age. The adult smiled, realizing that this boy was not ordinary, that he had a mind capable of seeing what others overlooked. The crowd shifted, and another figure took the stage for a short address. The boy's attention sharpened even more. He could sense the room's anticipation, the way people leaned forward slightly, eager to catch every word. He watched how the former president's eyes followed the speaker, noting reactions that the crowd might miss. The boy understood the subtle power dynamics at play, the unspoken rules that guided how people behaved around those in authority. Yet he also recognized the absurdity of some of it, and a small smile played on his lips. He knew that sometimes adults acted as if appearances mattered more than truth, and he had little patience for pretense. Throughout all this, the boy remained composed. He did not interrupt, he did not fidget, and he did not draw attention to himself unnecessarily. But inside he was preparing. He knew that a moment could come when he would have to speak, and he wanted to be ready. He thought carefully about his words, about how to make them clear, honest, and impactful. He understood that people often ignored children, assuming they did not have meaningful insights, but he also knew that sometimes it took someone unexpected to make people stop and listen. As the event moved toward a more casual segment, with mingling and photographs, the boy continued to observe. He saw the nervous gestures of some adults, the way others tried to look relaxed while scanning the crowd for familiar faces, and even the subtle eye contact exchanged between those who understood the situation better than they let on. The boy noticed patterns, connections, and little signs of truth and deception that most people overlooked. He felt a growing sense of anticipation, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something significant to happen. By the end of the part, the boy had not yet spoken, but his presence was quietly commanding. People may not have noticed him directly, but his observant eyes, his calm demeanor, and his thoughtful expressions marked him as someone who was not ordinary. The stage was set, the crowd unaware of what was about to happen, and even the former president, confident and composed, had no idea that a young boy, standing quietly at the edge of the room, was preparing to do something that would change the entire atmosphere. The boy's mind was sharp, his courage quietly building, and his sense of timing perfect. The room was filled with adults thinking they were in control, but the boy knew that sometimes the most unexpected voices could hold the most power. He waited, patiently, ready for the moment when he would step forward and speak words that no one would forget. As the speeches continued, a subtle tension began to spread through the room. It was not immediately visible, but the boy could sense it. Something in the way people shifted their weight, the way some lowered their voices or exchanged quick glances, hinted that not everything being said was received in agreement. The speaker, a well-known figure, was delivering his message with confidence and authority, but some of his words seemed exaggerated. The boy noticed small inconsistencies, statements that sounded off, and facts that didn't match what he had learned and read about. He could see how easily adults accepted things on the surface without questioning them, and it made him quietly frown. He was not one to let inaccuracy slide, especially when it seemed like the room was buying into something that was only partly true. The boy's mind worked quickly, connecting pieces of information and understanding the bigger picture. He thought about how power often shaped the way people spoke and how the words of a few could influence the many. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. Adults around him were polite, smiling and nodding as if agreeing wholeheartedly, but he could see the hesitation in some of their eyes. Some whispered to each other almost as if asking, "Do we challenge this or do we remain silent?" The boy understood that question instinctively. He knew that speaking the truth was not always easy, especially in a room filled with authority, but he also felt a growing determination inside him. This was a moment where courage mattered more than comfort. The former president, seated nearby, watched the proceedings with his usual attention to detail. He occasionally nodded, smiled, or raised his eyebrows in reaction to certain statements, but the boy noticed subtle signs that even he was processing the facts carefully. It was fascinating to the boy to see that age, experience, or status didn't make someone immune to being surprised or challenged by truth. He observed every micro-expression, the small pauses, the slight shifts in posture, and he cataloged them in his mind. He felt a sense of preparation building, as if he were readying himself for what was to come. Some of the adults in the crowd were clearly uneasy. They laughed at jokes that weren't funny, nodded at statements that seemed questionable, and occasionally cast wary glances toward each other. It was a performance of agreement, and the boy recognized it immediately. He had seen similar behavior before and knew that people often played roles in social situations, masking their true thoughts to avoid conflict or embarrassment. The boy's awareness of these dynamics gave him both insight and confidence. He felt a quiet power in understanding what others overlooked. A few of the younger attendees whispered among themselves, pointing out the oddities in what was being said. The boy caught some of the whispers, smiled slightly, and quietly agreed in his own mind. He was not alone in noticing, though the majority of adults seemed oblivious or unwilling to confront the issues. He wondered why truth often seemed more uncomfortable than lies, and why people preferred comfort over clarity. This thought made him more determined. He realized that if he ever spoke up, he would need to do so with clarity, precision, and courage. It was not enough to be right. He had to be undeniable. The speaker shifted to a new point, one that was supposed to inspire or reassure the crowd. Instead, it stirred a mix of reactions. Some adults leaned forward, eager to respond with applause or approval. Others leaned back, crossed their arms, or exchanged skeptical glances. The boy noticed all of it. He could feel the energy in the room change slightly, a ripple of uncertainty moving through the space. He understood that moments like this were fragile. The wrong word, the wrong gesture, and the carefully constructed illusion of agreement could crumble in an instant. He could sense the opportunity for a truth to surface, and it made him more alert. The boy's gaze wandered briefly to the family member beside him. They smiled proudly, sensing that he was thinking deeply and preparing himself. The boy whispered a small comment, careful not to interrupt the formal proceedings, and the adult nodded, impressed by his insight. The boy had always been thoughtful, always careful with words, and always prepared to act when the moment required it. He had learned from experience that timing and clarity were just as important as courage. Right now he felt that moment approaching, though he did not yet speak. He simply observed, listened, and analyzed. The speaker made a statement that was meant to be simple and reassuring, but it contained an exaggeration that was impossible to ignore. Adults around the boy responded as expected. Some nodded politely, some laughed quietly, and some whispered to each other, seemingly debating whether to react. The boy's mind immediately recognized the error. He understood the importance of speaking out, but he also weighed the room's dynamics carefully. He needed the right moment, the right words, and the right tone. Speaking impulsively could cause confusion, dismissal, or even embarrassment. Speaking wisely could change everything. As the speech continued, the boy noticed more small details. A few adults seemed caught in their own thoughts, distracted by internal debates. Some shifted uneasily in their seats as if they were aware that the boy was noticing their subtle reactions. Even the former president, though composed, showed a flicker of curiosity, a momentary shift in focus that revealed he was paying attention to the room, not just the speaker. The boy felt a strange connection to him, an understanding that both of them were observers, seeing patterns and truth that others might miss. It was not a rivalry, it was recognition. He understood that the room was a place of appearances, but he also knew that appearances could be disrupted. The boy's heart beat steadily, though excitement and determination coursed through him. He was aware of the tension, the anticipation, and the stakes. Every person in the room had a role, a reputation, and a set of expectations. The boy knew that a single moment could alter the dynamics, a single statement could command attention, and a single truth could unsettle the most composed audience. He had rehearsed similar moments in his mind before, imagining how he would stand, what he would say, and how he would hold himself. Now all those rehearsals were ready to become reality. The crowd began to shift as the speech neared its conclusion. People leaned forward, ready for applause, or leaned back, lost in their own thoughts. The boy sensed that the room was on edge, that the calm appearance of decorum was only a thin layer over the growing awareness that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. The boy's mind raced, analyzing each person, each gesture, each reaction. He felt the pulse of the room, the subtle vibrations of anticipation, and he knew that the moment to speak was coming closer with every passing second. A few whispers spread through the crowd as people started to discuss the speech among themselves. The boy caught snippets, noting which ones reflected honesty and which ones reflected caution, fear, or the desire to maintain appearances. He realized how many adults were more concerned with how they were perceived than with the truth itself. This realization strengthened his resolve. He understood that courage often comes at the right moment, when honesty is most needed, and that sometimes, even the smallest voice could make the greatest impact. By the end of the part, the boy had not yet spoken. He had listened, analyzed, and prepared himself carefully. The room was alive with tension, energy, and expectation, though most people were unaware of it. Adults continued to move, speak, and gesture as if everything was ordinary, but the boy knew that it was not. He was ready. He understood the stakes, the dynamics, and the power of words. The moment was approaching when he would have to act, when he would have to step forward and speak truth in a room filled with authority, expectation, and influence. He remained calm, poised, and observant, ready for the chance to make a difference, ready to use his voice to command attention and respect. The room, unaware, was on the brink of something extraordinary. The moment arrived without warning. The boy had been quietly observing for hours, absorbing every movement, every whisper, every subtle shift in expression. He had weighed his words, measured his courage, and chosen the perfect time to speak. As the speaker made another exaggerated claim, the boy could no longer contain the truth swelling inside him. He straightened in his seat, took a steady breath, and raised his voice clearly enough to be heard over the polite murmurs of the room. "Excuse me," he said, his tone calm but firm. "That isn't correct." The room froze. Glasses paused midway to lips, conversations halted, and even the cameras seemed to hesitate. People turned their heads in surprise, trying to locate the source of the voice. When they saw a young boy, no more than 10 years old, standing there with unflinching eyes, the silence became almost unbearable. The boy did not stumble or fumble. His posture was steady, his eyes locked on the speaker, and his voice carried a quiet authority that belied his age. The speaker blinked, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected interruption. They were used to being in control, used to adults nodding along, used to children remaining silent and polite in the background. This boy disrupted that order with a single truthful statement. The former president, sitting nearby, leaned forward slightly, curiosity flashing in his eyes. Even he could not have predicted that a child would speak with such clarity and confidence. The room had stopped moving. The energy shifted from casual formality to something electric, charged with tension and anticipation. The boy continued, unhesitating, explaining carefully why the statement was misleading. He cited facts simply, clearly, and without arrogance. His words were not harsh or disrespectful, but they carried weight. Each point he made chipped away at the false narrative, replacing it with clear, undeniable truth. The adults in the room were caught between admiration and embarrassment. Some whispered among themselves, unsure how to respond. Some nodded slowly, impressed by his knowledge. A few looked uncomfortable, realizing they had been caught off guard. The former president's expression softened into one of recognition, a subtle nod acknowledging the courage and accuracy of the boy's words. The boy spoke as if he had practiced for this moment, though in truth he had only practiced honesty. His voice never wavered. He did not look around seeking approval. He simply stated what he knew to be true, letting the facts speak for themselves. The room, filled with powerful adults and experienced speakers, had never heard anything quite like it. People leaned closer, trying to follow his reasoning. Others held their breath, unsure if they were supposed to react. The boy's words were simple, natural, and precise, but they carried the force of someone who refused to be ignored. For the first time, the speaker seemed genuinely flustered. They tried to regain control, offering explanations and softening statements, but the boy's observations were clear and accurate. There was no room to dismiss what he had said. The audience watched, some with admiration, some with mild shock, as a young boy managed to challenge authority without fear. Even the former president, known for his composure, appeared intrigued and slightly impressed, leaning back with his hands clasped, silently acknowledging the unexpected power of the boy's voice. Whispers began to ripple through the audience. Reporters quietly exchanged notes, sensing a story unfolding in real time. Adults who had been too polite or hesitant to challenge the speaker before now looked at the boy with respect and curiosity. Some had never imagined that such clarity could come from a child, and they felt a mix of embarrassment and admiration. The boy, however, did not seek recognition. He only wanted to speak the truth, and in that moment, the room itself seemed to pause and listen. As he continued, the boy addressed a few points that were often overlooked, connecting ideas and highlighting inconsistencies with careful reasoning. His words were not complex, but they were thoughtful, precise, and easy to understand. Adults leaned in, realizing that he had not only caught a mistake, but had explained it in a way that made sense to everyone. The former president's eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. He had seen many adults stumble or falter in discussions of this magnitude, but the boy's confidence and clarity were impossible to ignore. The boy's courage seemed to inspire a subtle shift in the room. People who had been hesitant to challenge authority began to nod in agreement, quietly validating the points he made. Others who had tried to maintain appearances found themselves reconsidering their positions. The boy had managed something extraordinary. Without raising his voice in anger, without being rude or disrespectful, he had drawn attention to truth in a room dominated by power and expectation. He had spoken boldly, clearly, and without fear, leaving a mark on everyone present. Even the adults who had initially tried to ignore him could not resist acknowledging the accuracy and bravery of his statements. Some smiled discreetly, appreciating the boy's fearlessness. Others exchanged quick, surprised glances, silently recognizing that they had underestimated him. The former president, for his part, leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing in thoughtful contemplation as if trying to understand the mind of this remarkable child. He did not interrupt or comment immediately, allowing the moment to unfold fully, respecting the boy's ability to hold the room's attention. As the boy concluded his observations, he paused, giving everyone a moment to absorb what he had said. The silence in the room was profound, almost tangible. It was as if time had slowed, giving adults and leaders alike the chance to reflect on a truth spoken with honesty and courage. No one applauded immediately. Instead, they listened, absorbing the impact of a young voice that had refused to be dismissed. The boy's calm, confident demeanor left a lasting impression, proving that age was not a measure of insight or bravery. A few seconds later, the former president gave a small nod, a gesture that carried weight in the room. It was a subtle acknowledgement of the boy's courage and clarity. Other adults, inspired by the example, began to murmur in agreement, and a few discreetly clapped. The energy in the room shifted from tension to admiration. People realized that sometimes truth did not need experience or status. It needed honesty and courage. The boy had provided both, and in doing so, he had commanded respect from everyone present. By the end of the exchange, the boy returned to his seat, his expression calm but satisfied. He had spoken the truth without malice, without arrogance, and without fear. The room had been captivated, stunned, and impressed by his ability to hold attention and make a point that even the most experienced adults could not ignore. The former president, still watching, seemed thoughtful, quietly acknowledging that the boy's words had an impact greater than anyone had anticipated. The event had been transformed in a few brief moments by the clarity, courage, and honesty of one young child. Adults, politicians, and reporters would remember it for a long time, realizing that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the least expected sources. The boy's heart was steady, but inside he felt a rush of satisfaction and quiet pride. He had done what he believed was right. He had spoken boldly, clearly, and truthfully, and the room had listened. In those moments, he had not only challenged authority, but had also reminded everyone present that honesty and courage could make even the most powerful people stop, listen, and reflect. The room would never be quite the same after his words, and the boy had proven that a single voice, spoken with clarity and bravery, could leave a lasting impression on everyone in the room. The moment the boy returned to his seat, the room remained quiet for a few seconds longer, as if everyone needed time to process what had just happened. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was a rare, almost reverent pause. People began to murmur softly among themselves, exchanging glances that carried a mixture of surprise, admiration, and disbelief. The boy sat calmly, his posture relaxed, yet his mind was alive with the thrill of what had just occurred. He knew he had spoken truthfully, clearly, and boldly, and he could feel the ripple effect of his words spreading through the room. The former president, seated nearby, leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. He did not speak immediately, but his eyes followed the boy, studying him with genuine interest. It was clear that even someone so accustomed to being the center of attention could not ignore the courage and clarity of the child's voice. The boy had disrupted the usual flow of the event, challenged authority with respect, and left everyone, including the most experienced adults, reassessing the moment. The energy in the room shifted subtly. What had been a formal, controlled gathering now felt alive with possibility and curiosity. Some of the adults, who had initially been taken aback, began to react more openly. A few whispered quietly, sharing admiration for the boy's insight. Others exchanged private nods, acknowledging that they had underestimated the intelligence and courage of someone so young. A few felt embarrassed, realizing that they had been slow to notice what the boy had pointed out. The boy's words had exposed not only the inaccuracy of the statements, but also the complacency of those who had accepted them without question. The reactions were varied, but they all shared one thing in common: respect for the courage it took to speak truth in such a room. Reporters who had been quietly taking notes now leaned forward, sensing that something extraordinary had just occurred. Cameras continued to click, capturing the subtle expressions of shock, admiration, and reflection on the faces of the attendees. Some reporters whispered to each other, trying to summarize the unexpected turn of events in a few words. They recognized that this was more than a simple correction or interruption. It was a moment that could become a story remembered for its courage and honesty. The boy, aware of the attention but unbothered by it, remained focused and composed, understanding that the impact of his words was already unfolding. The adults closest to the speaker appeared slightly flustered. They had been confident that the event would proceed without challenge, that the speaker's authority would go unquestioned. Now they were confronted with an unexpected truth delivered with calm precision. Some attempted to regain composure by nodding politely, offering supportive gestures, or subtly shifting their attention elsewhere. A few muttered soft apologies or explanations, acknowledging the correctness of the boy's observations. The room had become a delicate balance of admiration, reflection, and subtle embarrassment, and everyone seemed to sense the boy's quiet influence over the atmosphere. The former president, after a few moments of silent contemplation, finally leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. His expression softened, revealing a mix of curiosity and respect. He did not speak at first, allowing the room to settle and the significance of the moment to become clear. His subtle gestures, a slight nod, a raised eyebrow, and a thoughtful gaze communicated more than words ever could. Even he recognized that the boy had achieved something remarkable, capturing the attention and respect of an entire room through honesty and courage. Meanwhile, other attendees began discussing the incident quietly among themselves. Some praised the boy's insight, noting that it was rare for a child to speak with such confidence and accuracy. Others reflected on their own reactions, realizing they had been slow to notice the truth or hesitant to challenge authority. The boy's presence had reminded everyone that age did not determine the ability to understand, analyze, or speak boldly. The event, which had started as a formal gathering, had been transformed into a moment of reflection, curiosity, and admiration for courage. The boy's family, seated nearby, exchanged glances filled with pride and relief. They had always known he was thoughtful, perceptive, and fearless, but seeing him command attention in such a setting was extraordinary. They whispered soft words of encouragement, subtle praise, and gentle congratulations, careful not to distract from the ongoing discussions. The boy listened politely, acknowledging their support with a small smile, but he remained focused on the atmosphere of the room and the reactions of the people around him. He understood that the true reward was not recognition or applause, but the knowledge that his words had made a meaningful impact. As the conversations continued, a few adults who had initially been skeptical or dismissive began to engage more openly. They asked clarifying questions, shared their thoughts, and admitted the accuracy of the boy's points. The atmosphere shifted from subtle tension to a more open and thoughtful dialogue. The boy observed all of this quietly, noting the change in energy, the way people adjusted their perspectives, and the subtle admiration that had grown among the attendees. He realized that speaking truth, even as a child, had the power to influence, inspire, and change the dynamics of a room. The former president, now fully attentive, leaned back slightly and made a small gesture of acknowledgement toward the boy. It was a quiet, understated moment, but its meaning was profound. It communicated respect, recognition, and an understanding that courage and honesty transcended age. The adults around him seemed to sense this as well, and a ripple of recognition spread through the room. Conversations became more thoughtful, smiles more genuine, and attention more focused. The boy had done more than correct a statement. He had shifted the tone and energy of the event, reminding everyone present that integrity and courage held more weight than appearances or protocol. The reporters, sensing the significance, began to quietly document the reactions. They noted the expressions of shock, admiration, and subtle embarrassment on the faces of the adults. They captured the quiet acknowledgement from the former president and the thoughtful engagement of the other attendees. Even without a single loud comment from the adults, the atmosphere had been transformed. The boy's simple, clear, and truthful statements had created a moment that would be remembered and retold. Some adults approached the boy quietly after a few minutes, offering subtle praise and respectful acknowledgement. They complimented his clarity, his courage, and his ability to speak truth in a room filled with authority. The boy listened politely, nodded, and thanked them softly. He did not boast or draw attention to himself, understanding that true impact often comes quietly, through action rather than words. The former president, still observing from a short distance, seemed thoughtful and reflective, as if considering the implications of such a moment. Even those who had initially been skeptical were now reassessing their assumptions about youth, courage, and truth. As the event continued, the energy remained subtly changed. Adults spoke more thoughtfully, listened more carefully, and engaged with one another with a renewed sense of respect and curiosity. The boy's outburst had set a precedent, a reminder that honesty and courage could not be ignored. People were more mindful, more attentive, and more open to considering perspectives they might have overlooked before. The boy, though calm and composed, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had spoken boldly, clearly, and truthfully, and the room had listened, reflected, and responded in ways that would be remembered. By the end of the segment, the boy had quietly returned to observing, allowing the adults to continue their discussions. He remained thoughtful, noticing subtle shifts in posture, expression, and conversation. The former president, still watching, occasionally nodded or gestured in subtle acknowledgement. The room had been transformed from a routine formal gathering into a space where honesty, courage, and clarity had taken precedence over appearances. The boy's presence and actions had reminded everyone that sometimes the most unexpected voices carry the most powerful messages, and that truth spoken boldly and respectfully can leave an unforgettable mark on any audience. The event began to wind down, but the impact of the boy's words lingered in the air. Conversations that once focused on casual politeness now carried a new energy, a quiet seriousness. Adults who had initially been preoccupied with appearances found themselves replaying the boy's statements in their minds. His clarity and courage had left a mark, and even those who had been skeptical could not deny the truth and precision in his words. People whispered to each other, reflecting on what they had learned from such a young voice, realizing that honesty and fearlessness could command attention in ways they had not anticipated. The former president, who had observed the boy closely throughout the event, leaned back in his seat thoughtfully. There was a subtle smile on his face, one that indicated respect, perhaps even admiration. He had encountered many speeches, many adults asserting authority, and many moments of challenge, but rarely had he seen a child speak with such clarity and conviction. The boy's ability to remain calm, confident, and precise had left a strong impression. He had disrupted the usual flow of the event, commanded attention, and reminded everyone that courage and truth could not be ignored. Regardless of age or status, the boy's family quietly expressed pride and relief. They had always known he was thoughtful, intelligent, and brave, but witnessing the impact of his words in a room filled with influential adults was extraordinary. They whispered softly to each other, careful not to draw attention, acknowledging the quiet power of honesty when paired with confidence. The boy listened politely, smiling gently, understanding that recognition was not the goal. The real satisfaction came from knowing that his words had resonated, that they had made people pause, think, and reconsider their assumptions. As the event continued toward its conclusion, adults engaged in discussions with a new tone. Some who had previously ignored or dismissed the boy's observations now openly acknowledged their validity. They discussed points he had raised, shared their perspectives, and reflected on the courage it took to speak honestly in such a setting. The energy of the room shifted from formal politeness to thoughtful engagement. People were more mindful of their words, more attentive to the perspectives of others, and more open to hearing truth regardless of who spoke it. The boy's presence had reminded everyone that insight and courage often come from unexpected sources. The reporters present quietly documented the reactions, capturing the subtle shifts in the room and the expressions of surprise, admiration, and reflection on the faces of the adults. They noted the former president's thoughtful acknowledgement, the whispers of approval among attendees, and the quiet pride of the boy's family. Cameras clicked not in urgency but in a steady, observant manner, recording a moment that had become extraordinary in its quiet yet profound impact. Even without loud applause, the significance of what had occurred was clear. A single voice, spoken with honesty and courage, had transformed the energy and awareness of the entire room. Some attendees approached the boy, offering quiet praise and acknowledgement. They spoke respectfully, commenting on his insight, clarity, and bravery. The boy listened politely, nodding and thanking them softly without seeking to draw attention to himself. His satisfaction came not from recognition, but from the knowledge that he had spoken truth in a way that demanded attention and respect. Even those who had initially been skeptical of his age or understanding now treated him with genuine regard, recognizing that courage and clarity transcend experience and status. The former president, after observing for several moments, finally offered a small but meaningful gesture. It was subtle, a nod, a shift in posture, a thoughtful look, but it carried weight. It communicated respect, recognition, and an understanding of the impact the boy's honesty had created. Adults around him seemed to notice as well, and a quiet acknowledgement spread through the room. Conversations became more reflective, smiles more genuine, and attention more focused. The boy had achieved something remarkable. Without force, without arrogance, he had shifted the atmosphere and reminded everyone present of the power of truth and courage. As the event concluded, the boy's mind continued to process the experience. He thought about how adults responded to authority, how appearances often overshadow truth, and how a clear voice, even a small one, could make a profound difference. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Speaking truth in a room filled with authority, expectation, and experience had required focus, patience, and determination. The boy felt proud, not of recognition, but of having lived up to his own values and understanding. The former president gathered with a few other adults to continue brief discussions as the event closed. They reflected on the boy's words, the courage it had taken, and the way he had managed to shift the dynamics of the room. There was a subtle sense of inspiration in their tone, a recognition that even in positions of power, moments of clarity from unexpected sources could leave lasting impressions. The boy's influence had been quiet but undeniable. Adults were reminded that leadership, influence, and respect were not solely the products of experience or status. They could also come from honesty, courage, and clear expression. The boy's family accompanied him as they prepared to leave. They shared a quiet moment of reflection, discussing what had happened and what it might mean for the future. The boy listened attentively, absorbing their thoughts while reflecting on his own experience. He felt a sense of calm pride, understanding that courage and truth had the power to change minds, influence conversations, and leave lasting impressions. The family's pride was heartfelt but understated, mirroring the quiet dignity with which the boy had conducted himself.